As a courageous adolescent, she inspired millions and was once the face of optimism on television. What, however, transpired following the cancellation of I Am Jazz? You are mistaken about the answer. Jazz Jennings, who was previously enthusiastic and full of hope, is now having to deal with obstacles no one anticipated. She no longer smiles. Her vigor appears to be fading, and the life for which she battled is dramatically different from her reality. There has been a complete shift from emotional breakdowns to intense pressure. This isn't your average decline in popularity. Nobody wanted to witness this side of her life. The hidden battles that Jazz Jennings fought. The fact that Jazz Jennings transitioned so young contributed to her fame. Medical professionals spoke highly of her, and she was also featured in the media and asked to speak at various occasions. Her self-assurance and bravery were well respected. A battle with unanticipated emotional wounds and operations lay beneath the public appearance, though. Had gender confirmation surgery in 2018, which was a major life achievement. For her, the transgender transition was not complete without this operation. As with many others in the transgender community, Jazz had hoped for this day for a long time, and the operation was a huge step forward. Proponents saw it as a victory worthy of celebration. Troubles surfaced, nevertheless, not long after the operation. To ease the transition and stop the development of unwanted male traits, Jazz began taking puberty blockers at an early age. Unfortunately, this had the unintended consequence of preventing her body from producing enough penile tissue to form a vaginal canal, which is required for gender confirmation surgery. Because of this, her surgeons had to come up with a new plan. In order to facilitate the process, they decided to extract skin from her abdomen. The decision was intricate, had dangers, and required precision. The procedure was a failure, I'm afraid. Serious problems, such as swelling, prolonged discomfort, and difficulties with healing, quickly followed Jazz's operation. After the operation, thought to be the final leg of her voyage, but really marked the beginning of an even more agonizing one. Not one, but several procedures were performed on Jazz. Every time, doctors tried to fix problems that had arisen after earlier treatments. But the mental and physical toll it had on her increased in proportion to the number of surgeries she underwent. Under the weight of all the pressure she was under, she felt exhausted and helpless. In addition to physically getting better, but also handling the attention from the public. She was seen on television by many. I Am Jazz consistently showed her in an upbeat, confident, and energetic light. Nevertheless, a new aspect of her was revealed to the audience. Jazz spoke freely during private interviews and moments of intimacy. Something had changed inside her, she confessed. She had lost touch with her authentic self. At times, she felt completely devoid of emotion. Because of these events, a truth became apparent that many had ignored before. Despite its hopeful and proud beginnings, Jazz's story became a cautionary one in the end. This goes to show that sometimes there are unintended repercussions to even the most well-meaning medical judgments. Although her voyage was meant to serve as an inspiration, it brought up some valid concerns. Concerns about her youth, the lack of sufficient long-term research on the effects, and the surgeon's failure to adequately prevent complications prompted many to wonder whether the surgery had been appropriate. The effects of Jazz's ordeal began to show in her physical appearance as time went on. Instead of seeing her as a powerful and transformative figure, people began to view her as someone who was trying to get over what she had been through. Her emotions had been put to the test, and her physical appearance had transformed. She tried to start over in a world that had abandoned her once. The weight of everyone's expectations was adding to her recovery from surgery. On top of everything else, she had to deal with the continual scrutiny from interviews and cameras. It was a lot for a young person like Jazz to handle the pressure of being a role model while also dealing with emotional and physical suffering. Her narrative has lasting influence. It's not that things were easy, they were difficult. Gender transition is an incredibly individual and frequently difficult journey, as this shows. No two paths ever intersect, and even in the end, there may be unseen struggles along the way. Ultimately, Jazz has managed to stay afloat. Efforts to recover are ongoing for her. Maybe that's the key to her story's significance. The ability to keep going even when things become tough is more important than any amount of praise or admiration. As the limelight goes out, Jazz Jennings spent her entire youth glued to the television. From an early age on, people around the globe looked up to her path. Her self-assurance, boundless energy, and infectious joy were constants. People were astounded by her strength. She skillfully handled everything and spoke candidly about who she was. But there were problems lurking behind her fame. These issues didn't suddenly manifest themselves when they did. They started off slowly and then suddenly arrived. Following her gender confirmation surgery, Jazz began to withdraw from public view. There was a decline in her public appearances and social media activity. While fans did notice these changes, they were confused about what was happening at first. Upon her return, Jazz had a different appearance, a softer face, a heavier body, and a lower voice. A new melancholy had appeared in her eyes, and she spoke differently than before. The fact that Jazz had put on over 100 pounds was an open secret. During her recovery from surgery, it all started. However, it eventually became more challenging. Her bodily recovery wasn't the only concern. On the inside, she was also battling demons. Jazz began eating excessively, devouring whole pizzas and donut boxes in a single sitting. Instead of eating to satisfy her hunger, she gorged herself on thousands of calories all at once to dull the agony in her heart. She found solace in food as a means to alleviate her distress. In an effort to alleviate her distress, she turned to it. But her symptoms worsened in direct proportion to her food intake. Changes occurred in her mind and body as a result. Her mood started to dip, and she started to worry excessively. She started to have trouble with even the most basic tasks. She found it difficult to do even the most basic things, like brush her teeth or go to therapy. On certain days, the thought of leaving the house seemed insurmountable. Jeanette, her mother, and her family always had her back, doing my best to lend a hand. Still, there were moments when not even her mother's encouragement seemed sufficient. The scene where Jeanette begs Jazz to fight for herself was a moving one for viewers. As Jeanette pleaded with her daughter to return to her, her voice quivered with sorrow. As she sat still and speechless, Jazz seemed engulfed by her suffering. Jazz had been a self-assured adolescent, but now she seemed completely different. These scenes showed a side of Jazz that many had never seen before. They were real and sincere. She was no longer well-respected and was finding it difficult to manage the pressures of stardom. She had lost her serenity along with the platform that fame had provided. She may have become a symbol for many, but she had never found her own identity. The need to always project an image of strength had become too much to bear. A big event occurred after that when Jazz received admission to Harvard University, a prestigious institution that many people strive to join. Everyone was waiting for her to enroll right away, but Jazz decided to put it off since she needed time to recuperate on her own. This surprising decision surprised many. Jazz has long been considered unbeatable. In spite of everything that stood in her way, she never stopped moving forward. Still, she was finally admitting that things weren't going well for her. This dispelled a strong misunderstanding. Neither her life nor her transition were perfect. Behind the show, a young woman was just seeking solitude, unfazed by the adulation and attention she received. A story of optimism and bravery. Jazz's adventure began there. But as time went on, it evolved into something deeper. It evolved into a story about growing up in the limelight. The film delves into the weight of being seen as an example to follow before achieving complete self-awareness. It demonstrated how challenging it is to keep one's strength level consistent. Jazz showed true courage by backing down. She cared more about her health than about maintaining an outward beauty. Instead of acting like everything was fine, she resolved to concentrate on getting well. Jazz made her difficulties known. About them, she was forthright. She made it clear by her deeds that it's okay to be a bit of a mess sometimes. Her story is now about more than just being an icon or trailblazer. Now it's all about being human, which is something everyone can relate to. It delves into the inner conflict of finding happiness and the conviction that, no matter how dark the night, there is a way forward. Stays committed to her journey, showing no signs of giving up no matter how difficult things get. A change in Jazz Jennings began with heavy silence beneath smiles. It was as if her once vibrant and vivacious personality had faded. The once enthusiastic smile that formerly adorned periodicals, TV screens, and stages suddenly appeared more delicate and exhausted. Fans of her narrative who had been following along from the beginning began to notice these shifts. Over time, a question began to surface. Was she finding it all too much to handle at such a young age? Jazz's incredible evolution has been cherished for a long time. A lot of people think her tale was groundbreaking, had a profound and uplifting effect. She became an icon for a cause when she was just a little girl. Her life was investigated, instructional materials were written about her, and she was even mentioned on television by specialists in the field. Her name became synonymous with advancement. Her work in schools and conferences has had a significant impact on how people view children's gender identity. But while everyone was clapping and praising, another tale was developing behind the scenes. Both Jazz's physical and emotional stature were growing. The societal pressures to maintain an optimistic, strong, and idealized persona became more and more intense as she entered adulthood. She was more than a symbol. She was a living, breathing human being. Worries and concerns. Others started to notice that her story was about more than just celebrating as she continued to recount her experiences. A huge emotional burden also contributed to her feelings of being overwhelmed and bewildered on her trip. There was a shift in opinion among some who had previously backed early transitioning. Their main concern was whether kids as young as 2, 5, or 11 years old could fully grasp the mental and emotional ramifications of shifting. In 2023, a daring piece was published online, making a difficult question unavoidable. The Tragedy of Jazz Jennings was the title of the article, and it spared no details. The media, parents, and doctors who were involved with Jazz's life seemed to have viewed her more as an object than a kid, according to the article, who had considered Jazz's emotions before to making crucial decisions on her behalf. That was the question posed in the article. The protagonist, a young woman who has always received positive reinforcement, may have wished someone would verify her decisions. Healthcare, society, and culture were just a few of the systems in her life that seemed to be propelling her forward at a breakneck pace. She was unable to express her feelings openly or ask challenging questions. Unveiled a private information in an episode of her television program. She appeared solemn and still. It was Jazz's confession that she had never had sexual desire and doubted she ever would. A profound and amazing moment unfolded. No amount of music or editing could ever mask the authenticity. This was sincere. Onlookers to think long and hard about. For many, that one scene introduced them to a hitherto unknown aspect of Jazz. The speaker was anything but the typical confident public speaker or upbeat teen. She seemed more like a fragile young woman dealing with her own issues. It was as if she was unsure about her future and her own mental and physical health. Discovering her identity was no longer the only concern. Instead of focusing on achieving contentment within, did she actually enjoy being herself? Was her happiness genuine? What was the source of her distress, if anything? Eventually, more and more people began to pay attention, and eventually, more voices were heard. People who had made the change while they were young shared their experiences. While some expressed confusion, others regretted it. Denying one's individuality was not the point. Rather, it was to take things carefully so that growth could occur naturally. Jazz's narrative came to represent a systemic problem with an emphasis on affirmation rather than listening. Kids don't always have a crystal ball for what they want. Identity and feeling are still being explored by many. It can hurt the people it's supposed to help when the system doesn't allow for doubt and uncertainty. Perhaps Jazz's serenity was the price she had to pay. The entire globe turned their heads to look at her, and they were impressed and awed. But she may have given up her capacity to deal with her feelings at her own speed in return. Life is not perfect, but the world wants a story that is. Things are always changing, confusing, and chaotic in life. Hopefully, Jazz will discover peace as she matures and expresses her opinions. Being more than a mere emblem. It is my sincere wish that she would discover fulfillment in pursuing her own dreams without regard to the approval of others. It would be best if Jazz just did things slowly and didn't feel compelled to change who she is. Perpetual glow in the darkness, once upon a time, Jazz Jennings was a famous, dazzling star. She personified invention, hope, and change. She was not your average adolescent. People talked about her in meetings, classrooms, and the media. With a radiant grin, she graced television screens, magazine covers, and public appearances. Her energy, charisma, and self-assurance were contagious. For many, she represented hope, especially for the LGBTQ+ community. Jazz has been a frequent camera subject since she was a little girl. She had a global fan base, was a public speaker, author, and reality TV star. She was well-liked by all because of her intelligence, kindness, relatability, and strength. Her bravery was an inspiration to many. She became famous as the transgender girl who shared her story to raise awareness about acceptance and tolerance. She was portrayed as a living example of how shifting may lead to joy and contentment. The change in Jazz's temperament as she aged was striking. Something was amiss with her smile, albeit it was still there. She found it more challenging to maintain her strength. She began to show signs of the stress that had built up over the years. Withdrawal symptoms manifested in the previously outgoing adolescent. She seemed to have lost her self-assurance, fatigue, and volume. Her once lauded path started to show its weaknesses. When Jazz was in her early 20s, she started to realize how heavy she was. Lowering her problems become very obvious. She confessed to binge eating and frankly discussed her depression. After her procedures, she revealed that she suffered from emotional distress. She seemed less than the picture-perfect person everyone had anticipated her to be. It was just her, a young woman attempting to make her way through a world full of people with inflated expectations. The shift in Jazz's situation was hard for many to grasp. Her former backers among the activist community were now faced with the conundrum of what to do next. Many continued to rally around her, claiming that society's continued lack of inclusivity was to blame for her plight rather than her own actions. They believed that Jazz's struggles demonstrated the importance of providing additional resources for transgender people. Jazz remained a hero to them, as she faces challenges at the moment. The new Jazz, though, was difficult for some to grasp. After initially embracing her tale, other groups began to withdraw their support. Her life had stopped fitting the perfect story. The complexity of her story was enhanced by her challenges, metamorphoses, and internal struggles. In a culture that valued black and white morality, many found it difficult to explain complexities, success, and failure. Politicians and commentators were also paying attention while this was happening. People who held opposing views began to exploit Jazz's hardships to advance their own agendas. To make their case against transgender youth receiving medical care, they used excerpts from her show. Their purpose was served by manipulating her story. She was meant to be a case study on why transitioning was a poor decision. Ignoring Jazz's point of view totally, Jazz remained quiet throughout all the commotion. The once confident girl now seems weary. For a long time, she had carried the hopes of many, and now all she wanted was calm. She yearned to be recognized for who she was, rather than only a figurehead, and she refused to accept being reduced to that status anymore. Jazz allowed herself to feel a wide range of emotions, including bewilderment, grief, and annoyance, when she was alone and at ease. She had grown up in the public eye, never having had the chance to develop in peace, because there were always cameras and microphones about. Others had examined, recorded, and chronicled every facet of her life. Now she felt that the public, and not just herself, owned her concept of self. Reality stardom wasn't all Jazz Jennings was good at. Despite her youth, she bore a heavy burden. Her strength was a symbol of the movement, and she had to speak up for others who couldn't speak for themselves. Like everyone else, she felt sorrow, feared the unknown, and yearned for love and tranquility, even though she was the center of attention. With the passage of time and the waning of attention, many begin to question, who is Jazz Jennings when nobody is looking? Would you say she's an upbeat TV host? Is she the one who cried behind closed doors while nobody was watching? Are they mutually exclusive? Clearly, we should have sympathy for Jazz's journey, through all its ups and downs. It should not be viewed as an argumentative point or a perfect story, but rather as a reminder that there are actual people behind the news. The burden of the world should never have been placed on Jazz. Maybe she can finally give herself some attention now. The joy that the Jennings family feels. For many years, television viewers all over the globe have watched the Jennings family as they shared their inspiring tale of family unity, love, and support. A rare example of acceptance, they were held in high esteem. In the face of transgender daughter Jazz Jennings's meteoric rise to fame, the family stood strong, united, and courageous. They were an inspiration to many. With so much affection, medical appointments, filming dates, and press engagements, their home seemed like a safe haven. So far, everything looked great. But that wasn't the full tale that aired. The backstage area was constantly rife with minor flaws. They were masked by polite remarks, altered videos, and smiles. The family's pivotal role was Jazz's mother, Jennings. Appointment scheduling, treatment endorsement, and online and television defensive judgments were all handled by her, who assumed leadership from the beginning. She seemed unstoppable, determined, passionate, and fearless. She was a fierce defender who would stop at nothing to see her daughter succeed. It got more challenging for Jazz as she continued on her adventure. Both her emotions and her body began to struggle. There was no relief from the stress. Its volume grew. Additionally, Jeanette's frustration levels began to rise in tandem with that. During her first interviews, she had been upbeat and encouraging, but that optimism diminished with time. Her amiability transformed into palpable anxiety. The tone changed in subsequent episodes of I Am Jazz. Viewers saw arguments and pain instead of just happy events. A standout moment occurred at that exact moment. Sitting across from one another at the kitchen table were Jeanette and Jazz. It seemed like Jeanette was exhausted. She was talking faster and louder than normal. Jazz, deep in contemplation, sat still, eyes drooping. Neither did she reply nor dispute. There are no adequate words to describe the gravity of this moment. The argument between the mother and daughter was unusual. Years of expectations, miscommunication, and pressure were building up to a silent storm. A more systemic problem was emerging, one that had been simmering for some time. When I needed someone to lean on, Jeanette was there. But now some are wondering if she is exerting too much control instead of just guiding them. Some are questioning whether Jazz is still the main attraction or if it has morphed into something more substantial for which Jazz might not be ready. Doubts are beginning to creep in even among Jeanette's former admirers. They want to know if she is paying attention to her daughter or if she is trying to project an image to the public. A growing number of people shared this view, and some even went so far as to call her a stage mom, a parent who gets too attached to a situation to let go, no matter the consequences. Jazz was now a symbol of inclusivity and courage, standing up for a cause. But there were downsides to becoming a symbol. It required remaining in the spotlight at all times, even when things were going bad. Breakdowns, therapy sessions, and confessions would all have to be made public knowledge. Everyone in Jazz's family felt the effects of the stress. Her formerly gregarious siblings became increasingly reserved. With worry clearly visible in their eyes, they whispered softly. Despite their best efforts, the weight was too much. Greg, Jazz's dad, used to be the calm equilibrium to Jeanette's vivacious nature. Now, though, he seemed remote. Instead of being the reassuring presence he usually is, he remained quiet and distant. Everyone in the family was caught off guard by the shifting dynamics and unsure of what lay ahead. People outside of the Jennings inner circle used to look up to them as a model of how to provide unconditional support. But now they seem to be ordinary people too. Ordinary people who suddenly face a challenge far greater than they had anticipated. At first, they had come into the spotlight with a positive attitude, hoping to help, inspire, and make things better. In Finding Herself Again, Jazz Jennings tells a story that is both weighty and profound, and it makes you think. There's a subtle weight to it, rather than a lot of flashy drama or surprising turns. That clings like a cloud, carrying the hopes and expectations of many people before fully comprehending their meaning made her life more than merely growing up. Even as a young child, Jazz was looked upon as a trailblazer. Although that was not her desire, others saw her as a symbol of youth and advancement. The movement's public face was Jazz, smiling through it all as a child star, speaking up on TV about serious problems, and growing up in the limelight. Everyone was counting on her to be perfect, not only for herself, but for the cause as a whole. Without a shadow of a doubt, Jazz had to display courage, joy, strength, and assurance. She was never given the chance to be a youngster. But plans do not always materialize in life. You can't shortcut the process of discovering your identity. It takes time. Nobody has the right to shape their sense of self according to the opinions of others or the general public. While still developing her sense of self, Jazz sensed societal expectations that she serve as an example to others. The difficulties Jazz had to overcome were harder to hide as she got older. She clearly felt the effects of the years of monitoring. Truthfulness was Jazz's guiding principle, and kept fighting for the rights of transgender kids. But she began to talk frankly about how her adventure had changed her identity. The public had been presented with her narrative in a highly favorable light for quite some time. However, a fresh facet of Jazz was starting to surface. She opened up about how she felt lonely, confused, and disconnected from parts of herself. Instead of being forceful, her candor was subtle and powerful. One episode of her show showed a less publicized aspect of her personality. She spoke softly and quietly, admitting that she was confused and bewildered. Years of suppressed suffering were revealed by this seemingly insignificant confession. Her transsexual identity wasn't the only factor. Her human struggles were the subject of the piece. She talked about how tough it is to never mature, without being subjected to unending criticism and examination. The void that comes after years of being admired and praised was also conveyed by Jazz. Something crucial that we often fail to remember is brought to our attention by Jazz's narrative. When we rejoice in a victory, it's easy to lose sight of the individual who made it possible. People are complicated beings with their own set of uncertainties, emotions, and opportunities for development. It's tempting to simplify them into idealized symbols or figures. When Jazz was younger and everything were going swimmingly, everyone looked up to her and praised her constantly. The support, however, dwindled, and some even cut ties with her as she struggled with her weight, emotions, and sense of self. The neat storyline that had been crafted no longer accommodated her journey. Nevertheless, this challenging aspect of her journey, characterized by emotions and blunders, might be the most genuine. Honesty is present here. Jazz was not lacking. Being human was all she was doing. She was reclaiming her identity from the inside out, facing the consequences of her past decisions, and delving into subjects that she had previously avoided. A well-defined beginning and end are preferred by readers of narratives. Success tales and photographs of before and after are interesting to them. But her journey is far from over. Life is complicated and uncertain for her right now because she is in the middle. She faces new obstacles and celebrates minor victories every day. In a society full with expectations, Jazz is trying to find her own identity. It takes bravery to go through with this, but not the kind that makes others applaud. The year 2024 finds Jazz performing, albeit at a lower profile than in years before. She is no longer the center of attention. She is no longer featured on magazine covers and is not under continual surveillance by cameras. Quietly, she is concentrating on bettering herself instead. She keeps her followers informed with brief updates regarding her mental health, weight loss, and future plans. She no longer blogs at all. They seem as kinder, slower, and more intimate. Peace and calm prevail, and stress levels are lower. For the first time in his life, Jazz is not making any preparations. Just being herself is her goal. She isn't aiming for perfection. Here we have a young woman who is full of ideas, worries, and dreams. A new freedom is emerging for Jazz as she learns to shed the old labels.